In the small village of Eldara, there was a legend of a creature that roamed the dark woods, feared by all who lived there. It was a creature unlike any other, with eyes that glowed like fire and skin that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. To the villagers, she was no more than a monster, a terrifying being that haunted their dreams and whispers. Each night, the villagers would gather around the warmth of their hearths, speaking in hushed tones about the creature in the woods. No one had ever dared to approach her, and yet the stories that circulated were enough to make anyone's skin crawl. They said she could rip a man apart with a single glance, that her claws were sharper than the finest blades, and that she had the strength of 10 men. Her face was hidden behind a veil of shadows, but the very idea of her was enough to make people tremble. For years, the villagers had been living in fear, never questioning the stories they heard, never asking if the creature might be more than what they believed her to be. After all, no one had ever seen her face, and those who ventured too close to the woods never returned. The fear of the unknown kept them safe in their ignorance. But on the outskirts of the village, there was a small cabin, barely noticeable amidst the dense trees and thick fog. It was here that the creature lived, hidden away from the world. She lived in solitude, avoiding the people who called her a monster. Her name was Zira, though no one in the village had ever bothered to learn it. Zira wasn't always the way she was. She hadn't always been feared and misunderstood. There was a time when she had been like everyone else, a young girl full of dreams and hopes. But that was before the curse. It had been years since the curse was placed upon her. The once beautiful young woman she had been was no longer recognizable. Her transformation had been slow, painful, and terrifying. What had once been delicate features became sharp, almost alien, with eyes that glowed with an eerie light. Her once pale skin had darkened, and her hands had become claws, capable of great strength. Her body had changed in ways that no one could explain, not even the wise elders who had once spoken of magic in whispers. The curse had come without warning. It had been cast upon her by a power she didn't understand, a power that had wanted to punish her for reasons unknown. With the curse came the loss of her humanity, the loss of her place in the world. She had been rejected by her own family, cast out from the village she had once called home. As the years passed, Zira's heart grew cold, and her anger began to burn like an unstoppable fire. She had come to believe the villagers' stories of her, believing that she was a monster, a creature unworthy of love or acceptance. She had closed herself off from the world, convinced that she would never be accepted. She was a monster, after all, and monsters didn't belong in the world of humans. But on this particular night, something would change. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain with it. Zira sat in her cabin, staring out into the forest, her eyes distant and lost in thought. The storm outside matched the turmoil inside her. She felt the loneliness creeping in again, like an old friend that never seemed to leave her side. It had been years since she had spoken to anyone, and though she had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone, there was a part of her that longed for the companionship she had lost. As she sat there, lost in the storm, she heard a faint sound from outside. It was soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But then it grew louder, the sound of footsteps. Someone was approaching her cabin. Zira's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen another human being in years, and the thought of someone finding her lair filled her with both fear and curiosity. She stood up, her claws scraping against the wooden floor, and moved to the window. She peeked through the curtains, her glowing eyes searching the dark forest. What she saw made her heart stop. A man, tall and strong, was walking toward her cabin. He was alone, unafraid, and his eyes were focused on the cabin, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Zira felt a mixture of dread and fascination. Who was this man? Why was he coming to her? Did he know who she was? Was he another one of the villagers, here to destroy her? Or was he something else, someone who might see her for who she truly was? Her mind raced with possibilities, but before she could make a decision, the man reached the door and knocked. Zira's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anyone to come so close. She had expected them to stay far away, just as everyone always had. But this man, this stranger, was different. She stood frozen, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. Should she open the door? What if he was another villager, here to finish what they had started all those years ago? Or maybe, just maybe, he was someone who could see beyond her monstrous exterior and recognize the person she truly was. With a deep breath, Zira forced herself to move. She crept to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for the door handle, wondering what would happen when she opened it. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she was making a mistake. But then, with a burst of courage, she turned the handle and pulled the door open. There, standing in front of her, was the man. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He didn't flinch when he saw her, didn't gasp or step back in fear. Instead, he looked at her with calmness and curiosity, as if he was seeing her for the first time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Zira stood there, her glowing eyes meeting his. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but there was something about the way he looked at her, something kind, something different, that made her feel as if she could trust him. "Hello," the man said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've heard the stories. I've come to find out if they're true." Zira's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the stories, but he wasn't afraid. He wasn't running away. He was standing there, looking at her with a sense of awe rather than fear. And for the first time in years, Zira felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone in this world who could see her for who she truly was, not a monster, but a person with feelings, with a heart. Someone who could see her beauty, even if no one else could. The man stood at the threshold of Zira's cabin, his blue eyes unwavering as they locked with hers. There was no fear in his gaze, no hesitation, no surprise, just calmness. Zira couldn't understand it. She had spent years hiding from the world, convinced that no one would ever accept her, that no one could ever look past her monstrous form. Yet here stood a man who was not only unafraid, but almost intrigued. "Who are you?" Zira's voice came out in a low growl, her words heavy with suspicion. She had every reason to distrust anyone who came so close to her life, to her home. But the stranger, instead of recoiling or running, simply took a step forward, his expression softening. "My name is Kieran," he said, his voice steady but warm, like a gentle breeze on a cold night. "I've heard the stories about you, but I didn't believe them. I wanted to see for myself." Zira's heart pounded in her chest. He knew the stories. Everyone in the village knew the stories. The ones that painted her as a terrifying beast, a creature to be feared and avoided. But there was no anger in his voice, no hatred, no disgust. He was speaking to her as if she were no different than anyone else. Zira could barely wrap her mind around it. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone sharp but curious. She felt her claws itching, ready to defend herself if necessary. But part of her, a small, hopeful part, was waiting for an answer that might change everything. Kieran stood there for a moment, studying her. "I've heard that you've been living here, isolated. People talk about you as if you're some kind of monster, but I don't believe it. I think you're something more. Something beautiful." Zira's breath caught in her throat. Beautiful. He called her beautiful. It was the last thing she had expected to hear. For years, she had been told she was monstrous, hideous, a creature of nightmares. The village had cast her out, and the only reflection of herself she saw in the water was one that matched their cruel words. But here was Kieran, a stranger, calling her beautiful. It didn't make sense. And yet, the sincerity in his eyes made her want to believe him. "I'm not beautiful," Zira replied, her voice trembling for the first time since he had arrived. "I'm a monster. I've been cursed. People have been scared of me for years." "I don't think that's true," Kieran said, his voice soft, but firm in its conviction. He took another step closer, and Zira instinctively backed away, her claws tightening in fear. But Kieran didn't seem intimidated. Instead, he smiled gently, and Zira could see the kindness in his eyes. "I know what it feels like to be misunderstood," he continued. "I've been there. But that doesn't mean we should hide from the world. It's not about how we look, Zira. It's about who we are inside. And I can see that you're not a monster. You've just been hurt, and that's why you're hiding." Zira was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever looked at her with such understanding. His words felt like a balm to a wound she had forgotten existed, and for a moment, she almost believed him. But then the walls she had built around her heart began to rise again, and doubt crept in. "Why are you really here?" she asked, her voice a little more forceful this time. "What do you want from me?" Kieran didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. "I'm here because I want to understand you. I want to help you see that you don't have to be alone. And I want to show you that you can trust again. I know it's hard, but you don't have to carry the weight of your past by yourself." Zira's mind was swirling with emotions. She didn't know what to make of Kieran's words. She wanted to believe him, to let him in, but the fear of being hurt again held her back. She had been rejected by her own family, abandoned by her community. How could she trust anyone again? How could she let someone else close without the fear that they would eventually see her as the monster everyone else did? But as she looked into Kieran's eyes, something inside her softened. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her chest lighten, as though a small part of her, one she had buried deep within, was daring to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her for who she really was. Not a monster, but a person. "I don't know how to believe you," Zira said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been so long since anyone looked at me like I'm something good." Kieran reached out, and for a moment, Zira stiffened, expecting him to do something that would confirm her fears. But he only offered his hand, a gesture of kindness. She hesitated, but then, as if guided by something beyond her control, she took it. His hand was warm, reassuring, and for the first time in a long while, Zira felt something other than fear. She felt a sense of connection, a bond that was fragile but real. She wanted to pull away, to retreat back into her solitude, but something in her heart told her that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," Kieran said, his voice steady and comforting. "I just want you to know that you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Zira's eyes filled with uncertainty as she looked at him. "You're crazy if you think I can just let you in. People don't accept me. They never will." Kieran smiled softly. "Maybe not everyone will, but I'm not asking you to change for them. I'm asking you to see yourself the way I see you. Beautiful, strong, capable of more than you know." Zira's heart skipped a beat. Beautiful. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was more than the monster the world had painted her to be. But it was so hard. Years of pain, rejection, and loneliness had built walls around her heart that seemed impossible to tear down. But as she stood there, holding Kieran's hand, she realized something. Maybe the first step toward healing was letting someone else in. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. Maybe she could learn to believe in her own worth. "You don't know how hard it is to let someone in," Zira said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'll try. For you." Kieran's smile widened, and he gently squeezed her hand. "That's all I ask. We'll take it one step at a time." Zira looked out into the dark forest, where the night had begun to settle in. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of her isolation. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her beyond the monster's shadow. And for the first time, she felt like she could face it. The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of fear and hope for Zira. She was still unsure of Kieran's true intentions. Despite his words and the kindness in his eyes, the walls around her heart were hard to break. For years, she had been abandoned by everyone she once knew, and it felt impossible to trust again. But every time Kieran smiled, every time he reached out to her with kindness, a small part of her, buried deep within, began to soften. Zira had always believed that the curse she bore was something permanent, something that defined her forever. She had resigned herself to being a monster. But Kieran's presence began to chip away at the belief she had held so tightly to for so long. One morning, as the first rays of the sun pierced through the thick canopy of trees, Zira stood in front of the mirror by the small wooden table in her cabin. Her reflection was still the same, her skin marked with dark lines and scales, her eyes glowing in an eerie, unnatural light, her claws long and sharp. The face staring back at her was still the one the villagers feared. Yet something had changed inside her. The anger, the bitterness, the belief that she was forever condemned to be an outcast, they were all starting to fade. Zira stared at her reflection, searching for any sign of the woman she once had been, the woman who had been full of hope, kindness, and love. The woman she thought was lost forever, but she didn't see that woman. Instead, she saw someone stronger, someone who had been through unimaginable pain, but was still standing. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a monster after all. Zira. Kieran's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his eyes kind and patient. "I'd brought you something." Zira wiped a stray tear from her cheek, feeling embarrassed for showing any vulnerability. But Kieran didn't notice. He simply walked over to her with a small bundle in his hands, wrapped in a cloth. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing her the bundle. Zira hesitated for a moment, wondering what it could be. Slowly, she unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small, delicate flower, a wild bloom that grew in the meadows just beyond the forest. The petals were soft and vibrant, a stark contrast to the darkness she had always seen in herself. "I found it for you," Kieran said, his voice gentle. "I thought it might remind you that even in the darkest places, there's beauty." Zira's heart swelled, and for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't thought possible: gratitude. She looked at Kieran, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling foreign but right. Kieran smiled, his eyes lighting up. "It's nothing. You deserve to see the beauty in the world, Zira. I know you've been through a lot, but that doesn't change who you are inside." Zira's eyes flickered to the flower again. It seemed so small, so fragile, and yet it had survived. It had found a way to bloom in a place where nothing else would dare. Perhaps there was a lesson in that. Maybe she, too, could bloom, no matter how much darkness surrounded her. As the days passed, Kieran continued to visit her. Each time he arrived, he brought small gifts: a book, a piece of fabric, a meal he had cooked himself. But the true gift he gave her was something far greater than material things. He gave her his presence, his belief in her, his patience. Little by little, Zira began to change, though she didn't notice it at first. The isolation she had once welcomed began to feel suffocating. The silence that had been her constant companion now seemed unbearable. She wanted to hear Kieran's voice, wanted to feel the warmth of another person's presence. Slowly, she began to look forward to his visits. One afternoon, as they sat together on the small porch of the cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kieran spoke again. "You know," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I think you're beginning to see yourself differently." Zira looked at him, startled by the comment. "What do you mean?" "I can see it in your eyes," he said, his voice soft but knowing. "You're starting to believe in yourself again." Zira turned her gaze away, unsure if she was ready to accept that. She didn't want to get her hopes up, didn't want to believe that change was possible when she had spent so many years convincing herself that it wasn't. "I'm still the same," she muttered. "Nothing's changed. I'm still a monster." Kieran reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "No, Zira, you're not a monster. You've been hurt, yes. You've been through more than most people could ever imagine. But that doesn't make you a monster. It just makes you human. Zira looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion she couldn't quite understand. She wanted to pull away, wanted to hide behind the walls she had spent so long building. But Kieran's gaze held her steady, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to hide. "I don't know if I can ever be the person I once was," Zira said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever believe that I'm beautiful or worthy of love." Kieran squeezed her hand. "You don't have to be the person you once were. You're not the same as you were before, Zira. And that's okay. You're someone new now, someone stronger, someone who's learned to survive. You've been through the fire, and you've come out the other side. That's what makes you beautiful." Zira's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow or pain. They were tears of relief, tears that spoke of the healing she had never thought possible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that she could be more than what she had become. Kieran stayed with her, never pushing, never rushing her. He allowed her to take the time she needed to heal, to find herself again. But as the days turned into weeks, Zira began to realize that the change was already happening. She felt lighter, less burdened by the weight of her past. She was no longer hiding from the world, no longer isolating herself out of fear. One evening, after Kieran had left, Zira stood in front of the mirror again. This time, when she looked at her reflection, she saw something different. She didn't just see the creature the world had called a monster. She saw a woman, strong, capable, and with the potential for so much more. Zira touched the flower Kieran had given her, the petal still soft and vibrant despite the days that had passed. She smiled softly, the first real smile she had allowed herself in years. "I'm not a monster," she whispered to herself. "I am something more." The morning mist had barely begun to lift when Zira stepped out of her cabin, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The air was cool, the sun still hidden behind a blanket of clouds, but there was something different in the world today. The quiet, the solitude. Everything felt like it was waiting for something to happen. Something important. Zira could feel it deep inside her, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. It had been weeks since Kieran had first walked into her life, weeks since he had opened her eyes to the possibility of seeing herself as something other than a monster. Every visit he made had been like a breath of fresh air, slowly but steadily washing away the years of fear and self-doubt she had held on to. He had given her so much, his time, his belief, and most of all, his kindness. And in return, Zira had given him something in return. Trust. It had been hard, but she had learned to trust again. As she stepped into the light, feeling the warmth of the sun touch her face, Zira could hear the distant sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. There he was, Kieran, standing at the edge of the clearing, a small smile on his face as he looked at her. "You're up early," Kieran said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I couldn't sleep," Zira replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced with anticipation. "There's something I need to do, something I've been putting off for too long." Kieran raised an eyebrow, intrigued but understanding. "What is it?" "I think it's time," Zira said, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "It's time to go back. To the village." Kieran's expression shifted, his brow furrowing with concern. "Are you sure? After all this time, are you ready to face them?" Zira nodded, though a part of her, deep down, was still filled with hesitation. The villagers had rejected her. They had turned their backs on her when she needed them the most. The idea of returning to the place where she had once been cast out felt both terrifying and liberating. But she knew, deep in her heart, that it was the right thing to do. "I'm ready," Zira said firmly. "But this time, I'm not going back as the monster they think I am. I'm going back as myself. I've spent too long hiding in the shadows, and I won't let fear control me anymore." Kieran gave her a soft smile, full of warmth and pride. "Then let's go. I'll be right by your side, every step of the way." Together, they walked through the forest, the path familiar to Zira, but strangely new at the same time. Each step felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders, as if she was shedding the past and embracing the future. She had no idea how the villagers would react when they saw her, but one thing was certain: she was no longer afraid of them. She wasn't afraid of herself, either. As they reached the edge of the village, Zira paused. The buildings were the same, the people were the same, nothing had changed. But she had. In a way, it felt like walking into a past life, a life that no longer held power over her. She could hear the murmurs of the villagers in the distance, and as she stepped into the open, they all turned to look. Their eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, everything was still. Zira's heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't with fear, it was with determination. The villagers stared at her, whispering among themselves. Some took a step back, their faces twisted in confusion, while others just stood frozen, unsure of how to react. For the first time in years, Zira felt like she was the center of attention, but this time, it wasn't because of her monstrous appearance. It was because she had made a choice to stand tall, to face them not as the creature they had once feared, but as a woman who had learned to accept herself. "I know you all remember me," Zira called out, her voice carrying through the village. "I know you've called me a monster, and I know you feared me. But I am not a monster. I am a person, just like you. I've been hiding for so long, hiding from the world, because I believed what you believed. That I was unworthy. That I was cursed. But now I know better." The villagers continued to watch, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and, for a few, guilt. Zira could see the hesitation in their eyes, the uncertainty. They had heard the stories, but the woman standing before them was not the same one they had cast out years ago. "I've spent my whole life running," Zira continued, her voice trembling with emotion, but unwavering. "Running from you, from myself. But I've learned that running doesn't solve anything. It only makes you feel small. I'm not small anymore. I'm not afraid of you anymore." There was a long silence. Zira could see the fear melting away from the faces of some of the villagers, replaced with a mixture of awe and confusion. Then, to her surprise, one woman, an elder who had once been the loudest in condemning her, took a hesitant step forward. You're different," the woman said, her voice trembling. "You've changed." Zira nodded, her eyes never leaving the elder's face. "I have, but I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. I had to learn to accept who I am, to see myself as more than just the curse that I carried. And now, I'm asking you to do the same. Look at me, not as the monster you once thought I was, but as a person, as someone who deserves to be seen." The elder stood in silence for a moment, then turned to the rest of the villagers. The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one moved away. Some were still hesitant, others uncertain. But the fear that once ruled them was slowly starting to fade, replaced by something else: understanding. I don't know what to say," the elder whispered. "I see it now. You're not the monster we thought you were. You never were." Zira felt a weight lift off her chest, and for the first time, she smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had found peace with herself, someone who had learned to embrace both the light and the dark within her. "Thank you," Zira said softly, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried through the crowd. "Thank you for seeing me, for understanding." There was a long moment of silence before the crowd slowly began to disperse, some still casting lingering glances at her, but many more offering nods of understanding. It wasn't an immediate acceptance, but it was a start of something new. Karen, who had been standing quietly by her side throughout the entire confrontation, stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You showed them who you are. And you showed yourself too." Zira turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You were the one who made me believe that I could change, that I could be more than what I thought I was." Karen smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You've always been more, Zira. You just needed to see it for yourself. The village may not have fully accepted her yet, but Zira knew that this was the beginning of something new. The people would come around, in time. They had to. Because Zira was no longer the monster they had once feared. She was something much greater, a woman who had faced her past, embraced her true self, and was ready to step into the light. As she stood there, watching the last of the villagers disappear into their homes, Zira finally felt the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. She was free. Free to be who she truly was. Free to live, to love, and to be loved. And that, Zira realized, was the greatest revelation of all.